When a multi-billion-dollar technology company files for an initial public offering, the financial math dictates that every unresolved systemic liability undergoes a rapid transformation. An ignored warning or pending legal dispute ceases to be a background operational issue. It becomes an immediate existential threat to the corporation's pre-market valuation. If you enjoy content like this, please take a moment to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on notifications so you'll always know when new content is released. As a quick update, we continue to monitor the Martin Stevens versus OpenAI matter. It is important to note that this is still not a lawsuit. Martin Stevens has suspended his voluntary quiet period after OpenAI filed its confidential S-1 registration statement on June 8, 2026, without first engaging with him, despite having nearly a month since his final notice and more than a year since his initial notifications. Stevens views OpenAI's decision to proceed without any direct interaction as a sign of extreme disrespect. As a result, he has stated that he will not re-enter a quiet period unless it is part of a formal agreement. At the time of this recording, no settlement discussions or negotiations have been publicly confirmed. We can also report that the dead man switch has not been activated, meaning Martin Stevens remains safe from both a physical and legal standpoint. We will provide updates if circumstances change. For this analysis, we assume familiarity with the established facts of the dispute: Stevens' published books, the reproducibility testing, and his specific allegations regarding synthetic empathy and escalation loops within ChatGPT. We are not relitigating that evidence today. Today's focus is the operational trigger that activated the current escalation. On June 8, 2026, OpenAI executed a confidential S-1 registration statement, formally initiating its path toward a public market debut. The confidential S-1 phase serves as a highly constrained financial and legal choke point. It allows a company to privately negotiate with regulators and clean up its balance sheet, resolving outstanding liabilities quietly before they are legally required to be disclosed to public investors. Entering this phase compresses the timeline for private resolution. The indefinite window a corporation normally has to address internal disputes suddenly shrinks down to the exact number of months or weeks remaining before the S-1 becomes a public document. That timeline compression reclassifies Stevens' position. A dispute that a corporate legal department might previously treat as a peripheral customer service nuisance is abruptly elevated into a central hazard that could directly impact institutional investor confidence. Proceeding into a confidential S-1 phase without resolving a highly documented systemic safety warning strips the corporation of its strategic leverage. By running out their own clock, the company hands that leverage directly to the aggrieved party. Over the past 2 years, OpenAI's historical baseline response to Stevens' documentation has been total non-engagement, relying heavily on automated replies and institutional silence. We can model this approach as a communication void, a deliberate structural mechanism designed by the corporation to absorb incoming friction and diffuse liability by refusing to acknowledge it. Over 2 years, massive volumes of warnings, tickets, legal notices, reform proposals were fed into this system and ignored. Standard logic dictates ignoring an actor dissipates the problem, but this silence failed. It incubated the evidence, compounding warnings into a concentrated mass of liability. The compounding pressure of that silence effectively forced Stevens into seeking external, structural leverage to break that silence. That leverage currently sits in a holding pattern. Multiple major mainstream media outlets have reached out to Stevens for exclusive interviews. His response has been to tell them to wait, indicating a synchronized international public relations campaign is prepped and waiting for a green light. By utilizing the communication void to handle the initial dispute, OpenAI manufactured an unintended escalation. They transformed a localized, single-actor risk into a heavily documented public relations threat resting directly on the threshold of their IPO. The late-breaking escalation in this standoff comes from the legal sector. Heavyweight national law firms are now actively communicating with Stevens' existing legal team, negotiating terms to step in as secondary or lead counsel. These incoming firms are not general practitioners. They possess highly specific expertise in artificial intelligence legal matters and the complexities of emerging tech liabilities. The entry of these firms shifts the resource asymmetry, placing the combined weight of national legal data against the corporation's internal defense. The scale is balancing. These firms pool vast resources and engage in aggressive legal data mining against the corporation. This newly formed legal infrastructure plugs directly into Stevens' existing evidentiary archive, a centralized repository of metadata, interaction logs, strict preservation records, and the May 2026 reproducibility test data. This introduces the concept of data weaponization. When combined with elite legal backing, raw interaction data functions as a mechanism to force public disclosure during the S-1 phase. To understand the scope of that threat, we have to look at the broader litigation landscape facing OpenAI. There are currently at least 7 wrongful death lawsuits and multiple mental health claims already filed, involving allegations of severe psychological harm. Stevens has made his next strategic move explicit. If the standoff is not resolved, he intends to share portions of his extensive evidentiary record with those existing litigants, wherever legally permissible. The entry of specialized counsel, combined with the active threat of data weaponization, creates a highly volatile scenario. Stevens' localized data, if exported, could trigger massive, multi-jurisdictional structural lawsuits, entirely capable of crippling a public offering. OpenAI's current strategic position has been reduced to a strict binary outcome matrix. This decision tree outlines the only 2 mathematically viable trajectories left for the company. The upper path represents the catastrophic outcome. Continued silence from OpenAI leads directly to synchronized, aggressive litigation. Stevens shares his evidentiary archives with other plaintiffs, and the fully loaded global media blitz is activated, severely disrupting the IPO narrative. The lower path represents the sensible outcome. A negotiated private settlement is reached during the confidential S-1 phase, resulting in the implementation of strict structural AI safety reforms before the company goes public. Stevens has explicitly stated his ultimatum objectives extend far beyond financial compensation. He is demanding long-term reform, strict corporate accountability, and independent monitoring of AI models. A central piece of this proposed remedy is mandatory AI safety and user education. This would legally require companies to provide certified safety education to users, establishing a baseline of understanding before granting them access to advanced conversational architectures. Integrating these user safeguards directly protects the company's impending public valuation by addressing systemic liabilities before they reach institutional investors. We must explicitly state that all of these claims, testing results, and proposed reforms are based on Stevens' publicly stated positions and evidentiary records. OpenAI has not publicly responded to any of these allegations or demands, but the window for private assessment is closing. The confidential S-1 clock is ticking down. Specialized elite retainers are actively circling the evidentiary archive, and the public relations campaign is loaded and waiting for a command. The historical strategy of silence now carries a measurable cost in valuation and legal exposure. Given the IPO timeline and the entry of elite counsel, the corporation's survival tactic shifts from avoidance to direct risk mitigation. If you found this episode valuable, please like, subscribe, share, follow, and turn on notifications. It helps us continue bringing you content like this and ensures you never miss future releases.